Well, honestly, this week is probably going to be a bit crazy because everything is going to be leading up to the vote for the local elections on Tuesday, Friday, and the weekend. We will have the fallout of said local elections, probably continuing into next week as well. But during this week, it's going to be, somewhat difficult to sort of find news stories that don't entirely sort of focus on that, or how much panic is going on in number 10, or the latest sort of secret open rebellion that's going on in the Conservative Party. Probably those are going to dominate discussions this week. But I want to start off this week, once again, going back to Conservative Home. And oh boy, I've said this, I don't know how many times before, why we cover stuff from Conservative Home, because today is an exact reason why. Because you get crazy conservative ideas. And today's story comes from none other than Will Atkinson, whose grand vision of the future to achieve Singapore-on-Thames is to somehow build the Garden Bridge. For those of you who don't know, the Garden Bridge was this insane, crazy infrastructure project that Boris Johnson dreamed of when he was the mayor of London and never got off the ground in any way, shape, or form. But we are going to sort of find out what the way the achieve of this Singapore-on-Thames is, and how building this Garden Bridge will achieve that. But just quickly, for those of you who might not know what Singapore-on-Thames is, well, Singapore-on-Thames originated during the Brexit campaign as an idea to sort of sell what their Brexit would be, that we would become this low-tax, high-growth, all trading, singing, and dancing economy. That's basically the quick gist of it. That was heavily pushed during the Brexit referendum campaign. And of course, as we've said also many, many times, no, you cannot do that. We are not Singapore. Not only that, do we intend to go and sort of suddenly nationalize all our sort of industries like Singapore does, or engage in the crazy diplomatic shenanigans and the sort of king making that goes on in the Singaporean democratic system? Lots of reasons why we should not be, quote, like Singapore, but it was a good shorthand for the Brexiteers to try and sort of sling this is the version of Brexit we could have during 2016. It's never really gone away. It's still sort of the dream that Liz Truss sought. And of course, what ended up doing a lot of the damage. But to my shock, and to my shock, Will Atkinson as well, still trying to push this idea of a low tax, high growth economy. Anyway, this is why we cover Conservative because of these crazy ideas. So before we do go covering this new wacky idea from Will, please do remember to click on the like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, you can click the like, the share button, the Patreon page, the Buy Me Coffee link, the YouTube thank you button, and of course, the Pony Club down below as well. So thank you very much to all those people who do help and support the channel. And off we go over. Oh, hang on. When I remember to share the screen, there we go. Off we go to Conservative Home to cover this. So, the real route to Singapore-on-Thames, build the Garden Bridge. Let's begin, shall we? Let's begin. Oh dear. So begins with a quote from a guy called Lee Kuan Yew, saying, "My experience of developments in Asia has led me to conclude that we need good men to have good government. However, the good system of government, bad leaders will bring harm to the people. The single decisive factor that made for Singapore's development was the ability of its ministers and high quality of civil servants who supported them." Completely the exact opposite of what the current Conservative government wants. But there you go. Anyway, few leaders in a post-war history are impressors of Lee Kuan Yew. And the space of a single generation as Singapore's prime minister from 1959 to 1990, he took a former British colony forced out of a union with Malaysia by ethnic tensions from a third world to a first world nation. Not a nation is not great by its size alone, he once explained. As leader of the tiny city-state, he proved that. And there are lots of reasons why he succeeded, and of course the direction and the prime location of Singapore to take advantage of its location, all the other policies he said, a lot of those stuff was heavily nationalized. And the fact that not only did he hand off his political dynasty to his children, uh, again, something we really should not be wanting to do in the UK to replicate that. Uh, all these things the Conservatives would never really push in a month of Sundays. But of course, it is dreamed about by the libertarian crazy fanatics that only if we follow the Singaporean model can we then achieve some sort of economic nirvana. We too could be as rich as Singapore one day. But as we've said before, we are not Singapore. And if the Conservatives want to go the route of nationalizing over 80% of our industries, I'd love to see Jacob Rees-Mogg suddenly start changing his tune on that. But there you go. So he will continue saying, I have recently had the pleasure of visiting Singapore. Having never previously made it further east than Salzburg, despite rather invigorously being a member of the Oriental Club, it was an enjoyable opportunity to see close up a country who often plays a walk-on role in our political discussions. Just this week, West Streeting once again sang the praises of the island's health service. All sorts of really different reasons why, again, Singapore succeeded. Is Will going to sort of drill down to those core reasons why Singapore succeeded? No, of course not, because half of this stuff, the British public probably would not want to do, but also the fact that Conservatives, as we said, would have to really nationalize a lot of these stuff. But there you go. It's just a complete misunderstanding of why and how Singapore became what it was. It was a dream foisted, as Will's going to talk about soon, Daniel Hannan and his crazy ideas and theories about how we could make this and be a success as Singapore. Not really going to work, because we've talked about that a lot before in the past. So, the most common guise in which the city-state crops in British public life is in the semi-mythical context of Singapore-on-Thames, and that's exactly what it is. It's just a mythical imagining of what could be without the reality of really examining what Singapore did and how it came to such prominence. During the Brexit years, this became an easy shorthand for a vision of Britain's future as a laissez-faire, low-tax, free trading off the coast, declining the sluggish Europe, a soggy little island transformed into a poster child for prosperity. Bring it on. Not going to happen, because no one wants no regulation. No one wants low tax, because if you say low tax, what is it that the UK is no longer going to fund anymore? Not only that, how are we going to sort of guarantee all this free trading off the coast? Again, so many questions that when you start to ask, Singapore on the Thames starts to fall apart very, very quickly. So Daniel Hannan made the case for us back in 2017, which again fell apart just as he was making the case back then. It's still as flimsy as Daniel Hannan made it back then. In 1950, the United Kingdom had roughly twice as rich as Singapore per head. By in 2016, this position had now reversed. Life expectancy had risen from 66 to 83. Britain is only 71 to 81. As Hannan put it, rich and poor Singaporeans are respectively better off than their British counterparts. There is nothing more galling than being bested by an ex. Yeah, and that's because of Singapore's policies that it took in this part. And like I say, not all of these, shall we say, policies are what Daniel Hannan would sort of tell the truth of. Like I say, most of Singapore's economy and its national sort of stuff is 80% nationalized. Are we going to do that as well? And like I say, if we're going to follow their example, are we going to do that as well? Anyway, my good chum James Whittle has more impressive stats in his latest policy exchange paper. From 1916 to 2022, per capita GDP increased by nearly 1,800% compared to just 200% in the UK. Also, why did that happen? Well, as Will has already mentioned, it started off almost as a third world country. So if you are going to sort of measure from 1960 to 2022, of course, you are going to see such a explosive growth. So are you seeing many of these other countries in that area experience that explosive growth? And it is, once again, this idea of these free market fundamentalists just focusing solely on, oh my God, look at all that growth. If only we did what they did. This, again, this laissez-faire, free markets, low tax economy does not really represent what is really going on and all the other economic stories that are going on in this area. So again, they're the ones who are vastly misrepresenting what is going on here. So it now has the fourth highest GDP per capita in the world, with inflation average at least 2.5% between 1961 and 2022, compared to just 5.2% in Britain. Home ownership now sits at 93%. The good news obviously doesn't stop there. Singapore has had many prime ministers in 6 decades. As we've had in 2 years. It maintains and integrates a multi-ethnic population with a level of stability most European nations can only envy. It runs a habitual budget surplus, keeps government spending at a third of what UK levels, and keep taxes below the 15% of GDP. What's not to love? Everything else about it, probably. Yeah, they sing the praises of, quote, the good stuff, but never look at Singapore as a whole. This is always the downfall of these Singapore-on-Thames types. You can just go look it up, look at like the actual history, what policies Singapore has actually, brought in, what it does, why it's able to do that. And part of it is because of its location, because it sits at an incredibly good strategic peninsula on there. Because of that, that is a part of its big success story. Because it has those, that amazing access. It sits at one of the most, at the moment, important dynamic trade locations in the world. We don't. We're not going to up sticks and suddenly, sail off into the South Pacific. It's a completely misunderstanding about trying to sort of push this and the story of Singapore while not really talking about everything else, cherry picking what they like about Singapore while ignoring the rest. And yet, there is a great difference between coveting thy neighbor's productivity statistics from halfway around the world and seeing what they did, they add up in practice. Additionally, I was very grateful to spend several days touring the island, meeting with interesting, informed parties, and familiarizing myself with the entities from its underground network to its karaoke bars. Yeah, Will has a lovely affiliation for karaoke, where he once would have rather, shall we say, spent watching Eurovision than going to the National Conservative Conference, where he experienced the actual normal Conservative voter for the first time and didn't come away too impressed, if you remember that. So, what did I think? He says, highly impressed. It is a clean and well run as the stereotypes would have it. The National Museum has a refreshing honesty about the benefits of imperial rule. No one would struggle to find any British establishment today. Oh, yes, I'm sure there is absolutely zero critics of that. I'm sure there is zero critics of that exhibit in the National Museum. But there you go. It has a palpable sense of wealth found over only here in the richest parts of London. They even have Nando's, a sign quite clearly of a civilized people. That has some very bad connotations around that stuff, Will, but there you go. Once again, only really, eyeing So we say the good parts while ignoring probably the rest of what's going on in Singapore. So, yet, whilst I immediately admired the nation's and its tangible achievements, I was also struck by just how alien it is. Partly because I am a stereotypical Englishman abroad. I insist on wearing at least 3 layers and a 30-degree hat, showed skepticism toward local food, and longed for a pint. But there was also experience of being confronted by a wholly different political culture. Yep. And he's actually talking about that political culture as well. Whilst our American quote cousins shared a single language provides an illusionary veneer of similarity, as a former colony, Singapore has a parliament, a judiciary, and a civil service modelled upon our own. Unlike in Britain, the same party, the People's Action Party, has remained in power since independence, with regular elections and now combined with with zealous intolerance of any form of corruption. And you also might like to wonder why the said People's Action Party stayed in power for that long a time. I wonder if Will's going to get into that. So, what is manifest itself is as now a governing culture of technocratic excellence. Underpaid ministers and public officials have ruined many governments in Asia, Lee warned. Singapore now resists that trend by ensuring that its ruling class is well remunerated and that it has the training and talent to try and match that reward. The product of their politicians puts many British MPs and ministers to shame. We could do that as well. If you want to pay the civil servants more, make it a really attractive career prospect for people. Why can't we do that as well? There's nothing wrong with us doing that. Maybe we could also really start to sort of teach civil service courses in university as well. So if you want to go join the Foreign Office, there's an entire course dedicated to that at university or the Home Office or things like that. There's all sorts of stuff we could do. Do you see the Conservatives arguing for that? No, they are actively blaming the civil service for their own bad policy mistakes when the civil servants are the one being told what to do by these MPs. So, single party rule has enshrined a degree of political stability that Tim Shipman could only dream of. Yeah, and that's also probably one of the problems of Singapore, the single party rule. Politicians also have an overwhelming focus on the national interest. 60 years on from independence, there is still a sense that Singapore, for all its successes, is a small island nation with the world against it. Imagine if British politics was stuck in the summer of 1940. It's not too hard. Well, it's really not hard at all. Well, I do agree with you on that. It does feel like a lot of that listening to a lot of your Conservative colleagues on many of those topics. The first question for any minister is what is best for Singapore? What also appeases an ideology of a stakeholder group, such as the Singapore-on-Thames version of a libertarian paradise, is inaccurate. Taxes and tariffs may be low, but the government is highly interventionist. I'm actually shocked that he actually mentions that because, yeah, the government in Singapore are highly interventionist. So the Singapore on the Thames group and the ideology falls apart immediately on that because they are completely laissez-faire, which basically means we want nothing to do with it. If anything bad happens, well, hey, that happens, because their ideology is completely wackadoodle in that respect. But there you go. Home ownership rates rely on 90% of land being owned by the state and mass public house building. Do you ever think they're going to do that? Nope, not this Conservative government, but there you go. So there are far more Harold Macmillan than Margaret Thatcher. Singapore's government has also rigorously promoted how society should be structured. Few Conservatives would be unhappy with the state suggesting the importance of family, but few at the winter's end of the party might be uncomfortable bracing for high levels of public support for corporal and capital punishment. Singapore also offers less less to Britain in guidance on managing multi-racialism than one expects. 79.6% of citizens and permanent residents are ethnic Chinese and ethnically Malay, and Indians also comprising 15 and 7.5%. By contrast, England and Wales are 75% British, 9% Asian, 6% say other white, 4% black, and 5% other mixed race. So once again, Will starts off in this article singing that it's a pattern for multiracialism, but the reality is there is a very overwhelming dominance. And I'm sure there are racial tensions. But Will's not going to talk about them. So, considering the Michaela's academic recent travels, parallels are obviously now being drawn between Catherine Burbank's cask strength skepticism and Singapore's system of multiculturalism. Freedom to criticize religions or live where one chooses are curtailed to prevent and repeat the inner ethnic conflict that marred its early history. Does multiracial Britain require something similar? I can't really see that happening either, but I can see the Gammons having a massive problem with that. Suddenly they can't criticize other people's religions. Oh boy. Expect one side of your party to be incredibly annoyed about that. So, not only would such an approach challenge the relaxed liberalism with which we have previously integrated ethnic and religious minorities, that it also avoids the critical component of Singapore's success: low immigration. For 60 years, Singapore's demographic balance has been kept consciously stable. Simultaneously, Britain has gone from being overwhelmingly white to strongly diverse. Mapping Singaporean solutions onto the British context also contends with the basic problem that, unlike Britain, Singapore is in reality a really small and half the size of London, with a population that sits a tenth of its size. This not only makes policing, infrastructure, construction, and travel much easier, but does also help maintain that quintessential sense of both national identity and the existential threat. As I said at the very beginning, these policies that they would want to sort of put onto Britain ain't going to work because we ain't Singapore. As such admirable as Singapore is, the more one learns about it, the harder one finds identifiable the copy and paste solutions streeting are also trying to look for. Exactly. You cannot just copy and paste all the stuff from Singapore straight onto sort of the UK. There is a lot of stuff we can sort of copy and paste from Europe because we are sort of, similar size, very sort of similar situations, but you cannot copy and paste stuff from Singapore. Doesn't work like that, unfortunately, but there you go. The country is now have a very refreshing approach to the fundamentals of government that we now lack. God knows that Britain could do with a Lee Kun Yang. Improving the quality of the people in our public life is the greatest challenge of our age. At least I'm glad that we do agree with that. Increasing the value and the better people in public life is a great challenge for them. Nevertheless, if I find myself immediately able from the Singaporean model, then I expected. Here is one of Lee's initiatives that Conservatives should this side of Eurasia adopt straight away. He took an active role in transforming Singapore into a garden city. Everywhere you go, there are trees, flowers, vegetation. The island is like one big, wonderful greenhouse. Why not do it then? Why not put money into that? Of course, Conservatives aren't going to do that, but there you go. One understands that, of course, Susan Hall's chances of being elected as Mayor of London are hardly high. But if she has one come May the 3rd, we should make it her mission to revive the pet project of the last Conservative mayor that found itself waylaid by Sadiq Khan's spiteful penny pinching. No, because it was going to be building a bridge that was going to cost billions of pounds that wasn't going to be really that successful, where you could build another bridge and have it, relatively quicker and a lot more cost effective. But there you go. There are other ways if you want to green London more. Great if you want to do that and build more green spaces in London. she could do that if you want to. You do not have to revive the Garden Bridge on that. So while this, of course, is a dreaming of the dream of Singapore and on Thames, at least Will does acknowledge some of the problems that Singapore does have. That, we aren't Singapore. Singapore is its own unique thing, very, very much so. And of course, due to its unique position, it has benefited from that completely. Well, of course, you didn't notice, of course, Will talking about the politics that goes on in there, some of the policies that made Singapore, that got it to be such, a success. He did briefly mention on of course, about how interventionist the government in Singapore is. The Conservatives, of course, would want none of that. They are completely against intervention in a whole load of regions and areas. And that's why I think it is good to be interventionist. The government should step in when things start to go wrong, or try and correct things themselves, or the power of the government is an incredibly good thing and can be used for a lot of good, depending on the type of policy that you want to go for. So are we going to do that? Are we going to nationalize 80% of our industries? I doubt it. I very, very much doubt it. But at least Will, slightly for once, is being an honest conservative about the dream, or the mythical dream, of Singapore-on-Thames. At least he's being slightly honest about that. But there you go. So, as always, thank you very much for watching. Let me know what you think down in the comments. And of course, as always, if you are from Singapore, please do let me know what you think to Will's comments on this. I'd be fascinated to know. But as always, thank you very much for watching. And of course, as always, we'll see you all next time.